If New York is the city so nice they named it twice, then Rome is the city so influential that one single origin could never quite account for its rise to global prominence. The myriad traditions of the ancient Romans themselves centered around the legendary figure of Romulus and his ill-fated brother Remus. But the specifics of the tale could be hazy, and there was never universal agreement on many of the finer points. That was even before Aeneas and his Trojan refugees had to be folded into the city's origin to give Rome the antiquity that its citizens felt it deserved. The foundation of the Republic itself was also relatively murky. The story of Lucretia certainly made for a compelling narrative, but modern readers are able to discern the telltale signs of later embellishment, and we must wonder just how much of the narrative the average Roman would have believed was truly historical. So, considering the uncertain traditions upon which the Republic was set, we should not be surprised that sources such as Cato the Elder and Cicero both portray the Republic as beginning not with the possibly fictional coup orchestrated by Brutus, but with an event that was much more firmly rooted in the verifiable era than the mythic past. Both agreed that the Republic began in earnest with the formulation of the 12 Tables, a law code that represented a seismic transformation for the Roman Republic, and formed the basis for a legal order that would endure for millennia. The irony of both Cato and Cicero tracing the seed of the Republic's functional origins to the promulgation of the 12 Tables is that this momentous event was the result of something that both men detested: grassroots popular agitation and direct action. Cato was of course a noted opponent of any change, particularly innovations with Greek origins. But the 12 Tables represented a fundamental shift in the balance of power in the early Roman Republic, and, according to tradition, were even inspired by Athenian laws. Cicero's appreciation for the 12 Tables was so deeply ingrained that he mourned the fact that schoolchildren no longer learned the laws by heart, as he had once done. Whether a factual complaint or a trademark bit of Ciceronian hyperbole, this small aside in his De Legibus lets us know how much he appreciated the fruits of this law code, which he viewed as a core aspect of the traditional republic he was fighting to protect. Cicero's interpretation becomes rather strange when we leaf through his writings and see that he seemed to fundamentally believe that the poor lacked any right to direct agency, routinely referring to any mass assembly as a mob or a rabble, as part of his concerted effort to delegitimize them and their concerns. He even cast himself in firm opposition to Clodius, the late Republican politician most famous for leveraging the power of the urban poor and their collegia to make himself one of the most powerful men in Rome. But Cato and Cicero's embrace of the 12 Tables demonstrates that despite the origins of the law code, even what was once a radical change can come to be seen as a firm tradition if enough time passes. Conservatism, then as now, does not stand on an unshakable bedrock of unalterable tradition, but is ever malleable, and always adjusting and repositioning itself according to changing social factors, as well as the ebb and flow of societal power. Further complicating matters is that the story of mass action and plebeian resistance that Cato and Cicero would have believed is itself likely highly embellished and may not bear a significant resemblance to what actually transpired. However, even though there are ample reasons for skepticism regarding the version Roman historians accepted, a discussion of alternate theories will have to wait until a future episode, as this video will primarily deal with the story the Romans told themselves about the origins and importance of the 12 Tables. For while historians must analyze sources to uncover bias and embellishment, as well as to weigh them against the backdrop of emerging archaeological evidence, it is equally critical that we not diminish the importance of popular legends by degrading them to the status of myth. because regardless of how sharply they may diverge from modern evidence, these were the stories that Romans accepted, and thus these were formative to their collective and individual identities as applied to religion, society, culture, and state. Rome's legends may not be true in the empirical sense, but their impact on the Roman mind, and therefore on material history, are no less real than if they were all verifiable fact. Unsurprisingly, the agitation began with the tribunes, the magistrates elected directly by the people who sought to give voice to the concerns of the typical Roman. Caius Terentilius Harsa was tribune of the plebs that year. Thinking that the absence of the consuls afforded the tribunes an opportunity for action, he employed some days in complaining to the people of the pride of the patricians, and inveighed especially against the authority of the consuls, as a thing excessive and intolerable in a free state. For it was only in name, he said, that it was less hateful than that of a king. In reality, it was almost crueler, since, in place of one master, they had now got two, who possessed an unregulated and unlimited power, and while free themselves and without restraint, brought to bear all the terrors of the law, and all its punishment upon the plebs. In these early decades of the Republic, the promises of freedom and liberty that had been the pretext for the overthrow of the Tarquins were proving to be hollow. Yes, Rome was rid of kings, but this new republic was not free of tyrants. Elections were held, which allowed for the plebeian underclass to have some limited say, but at this point the chief magistracies and priesthoods were all reserved for the narrow clique of patricians that ruled the city. But, even more disturbingly, the new republic was not one based on law, but instead was centered around patrician power and privilege. If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support. In fact, there was no written law code at all. Rather, the laws were unwritten and guarded as oral traditions among the aristocratic priestly class that was tasked with interpreting them. Unaccountable judicial overlords out of touch with the mass population is clearly a recipe for rulings that were opaque, duplicitous, self-serving, and capricious. Obviously, many plebeians agreed, because they were eager to rally to Terentilius's standard and demand a written law code that the consuls and other magistrates would be subject to, instead of being free to interpret obscure and unknown laws themselves, and thus effectively acting without any check on their power. The patricians recognized the threat this posed to their status and fought back hard against this proposal, even slandering Terentilius as a traitor for the crime of demanding the Republic abide by its stated principles. Facing this unified front, Terentilius's proposal was dead in the water, despite massive popular support. The next 5 years were defined by significant conflict between the orders, as the plebeians responded to the refusal to introduce a written law code by electing the same tribunes for 5 consecutive terms. The entire city was at each other's throats, with bad omens cited, and Livy describing the situation as political warfare. In 457, the crisis came to a head, with the news of incursions by the Equians and Sabines and the need to muster fresh troops. The plebeians had all the leverage now, and forced a concession that the number of tribunes be increased to 10. But, though this was progress, it was not what the plebeians had demanded, and tensions re-emerged the following year, when a famine made grain scarce in the city. Finally, a tribune named Claudius Cicero decided to play hardball, and prosecuted a former consul for misappropriating spoils won after the defeat of the Equians. He was found guilty and given a hefty fine, but more importantly, a message was sent that the plebeians could even strike at former consuls. This proved effective, and the Senate soon agreed to plebeian demands in principle, sending a commission to Athens to study Solon's laws, while Livy tells us that after an initial lull in the class conflict, it re-emerged following a drought and a famine, with the plebeians convinced that the patricians would renege on their end of the bargain as they had in the past. A situation that looked set to devolve further was fortunately resolved with the timely arrival of the commissioners, and it was agreed that all magistrates in the city would be suspended for 1 year, as the code was formulated, by a board of 10 men, the decemvirate, who would replace all officials and, importantly, would not be subject to appeal. This, at least, is the traditional narrative, and though modern scholars have poked holes in some aspects, such as wondering if the class composition of the board was really as relayed to us by our sources, asking why the magistracies needed to be suspended for 1 year to allow for a commission to draft a code that could have been addressed in a relatively short time by a non-magisterial body, and most importantly, if this good first decemvirate was really followed by a bad second decemvirate. We must recognize that, broadly speaking, this is the tale that the Romans would have believed. Cato, Cicero, and indeed every conservative aristocrat would have known that the foundation for the republic they professed to defend was the result of popular agitation, and not divine blessings. For it is only in the partial severing of law from the divine order that the 12 Tables made any radical adjustments to Roman society. Though we only possess it today in fragments, what we do have appears to be a validation of the status quo, with slavery, private property, and the unquestioned authority of the paterfamilias all taken as given, and indeed treated as essential for the 12 Tables to function. Tellingly, nocturnal meetings were banned, signaling elite apprehension about a tactic that was almost certainly employed by the reformers so that they could organize in secret. This makes the law code an excellent portrait of Roman society and its concerns in the middle of the 5th century BCE, and we are able to glean important insights about social and economic organization from how the laws are formulated, as well as which foreign ideas were already influencing Roman society and thus earning legal sanction. The chief aspect of interest for our purposes, then, is that all of these provisions are thoroughly secular. The laws and their punishments are defined in legal terms, with no reference to arcane or cultic rites. Of the surviving material, there is only one law which calls for divine retribution: the statement that a patron who betrays a client should be accursed. While there is a temptation to see the introduction of a more secular law code as an effort to apply scientific rationality to the Roman state, I believe that this is the wrong interpretation. The plebeians who advocated for this law code were not proto-atheists, seeking a separation of religion and state. Rather, they were seeking to remove the stranglehold that the aristocratic priestly class had held over the law up to this point by shrouding it in religious ritual and esoteric divine revelation. As patricians still controlled the priesthoods, the only way to ensure that the law was fair and transparent was to remove the ability for religiously guided interpretation, which the aristocrats had proved willing to subvert and harness towards their own ends. We need not invent religious motivations for the plebeian reformers, when the class dynamic is so abundantly evident. So, though the 12 Tables as formulated did not call for the radical reorganization of the Roman state, by simply mandating that a foundation of law be applied consistently, the door was opened for future reformers to continue remaking the Roman state through the inclusion of one key law on the 12th and final table: what the people ordain shall be valid. Roman thought around this one line would evolve and shift within the Republic, as reformers called for ever greater rights and authority for the people. eventually culminating in Tiberius Gracchus's articulation of the idea of popular sovereignty. The influence of the 12 Tables would survive long past the fall of the Republic, and even the imperial era, to form a central pillar of the Western legal tradition. So, though we no longer have laws on the books forbidding women from cutting their cheeks or crying out during funerals, the seed represented in the idea that rulers should be subject to law remains, and, despite setbacks, it has only been expanded upon over the millennia. We now sit in the shade of a tree planted by the Romans, and tended by the reformers from countless intervening generations who heeded the words of Cicero in his biography of Cato the Elder, praising those who embark on great endeavors of which they will never see the benefit, but that they know will aid those who come after. For no one is so old as to think that he cannot live one more year. Yet these same men labor at things which they know will not profit them in the least. He plants the trees to serve another age. What trees are you planting?